Hello, everyone. This is Ernie Humphrey. I'm the CEO of Treasury Webinars. Thrilled to have everyone with us today on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, understanding your bank fees, the 2020 AFP Service Codes, and the 2023 AFP Global Service Codes in a Treasury galaxy far, far away. I used to be responsible for help managing the AFP Service Codes, and so way back in the day, I had the pleasure of working with Bridget Meyer, who is absolutely the world's expert on all things related to the AFP service code. So before I jump in to the exciting housekeeping items real quick, I just want to go ahead and welcome Bridget Meyer to the webinar. She's the head of strategic relationships. She at Redbridge Debt and Treasury Advisory. Bridget, welcome, and it's a thrill to have you here today with us.
Thank you, Ernie. I'm so excited to be here. You know, it's my favorite subject.
All right, cool. Well, before we get going, I'm going to have to launch a polling question just so we can level set a little bit. Everyone, just how long you spend on your looking at your bank analysis statements. As many of you know, I was a longtime treasury manager. I had this pain long, long ago. We didn't have all the tools that we have now, but it actually took me months and a lot of meetings to understand every single line on my bank analysis statement. So that's something that you should absolutely be entitled to. So it's responsibility on your banks to sit down with you so you understand every single line of those bank analysis statements. So just want you have advocates here. I love banks, I love them, but we need to work on the transparency of the pricing, and it's a win-win relationship when we have better transparency. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys about 10 more seconds, and I'm going to give you the old buzzer like the NCAA because with tournament time, a lot of great women's basketball today, and then the men's kicks back tomorrow. There we go. 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the results here. So pretty good concentration around 1 to 5 hours. So I'm hoping those of you that do that and less, that you have some software to help you on that. Obviously, it becomes more complicated the more banks you have, different banks, the types of services that you have across the globe. So if you don't look at your bank statements every month, I would strongly encourage you to do so. In my experience, I used to look at my bank statements every month, and I usually found that there were things that were not charged quite correctly, and that there can be a myriad of reasons, but I think it's important that everyone makes that effort. So thank you very much, everyone, for doing that. I'm going to go ahead and switch the controls over to my esteemed co-speaker, Bridget Meyer. So we're going to go ahead and get that going for us. So Bridget, go ahead when
Okay,
you get
I
a
am
chance.
working on changing the screen. Here we go. So today, everyone, can you see my screen, everyone?
Yes, we
Ernie, all
can.
good? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is the AFP service codes. First of all, making sure everybody understands what they are, a little bit about their mapping, et cetera, and the different code sets that you might see. And then we're going to talk about some cool stuff that you can do with them, so why they matter. So all of you who spend hours in there, you're joining this webinar because you are trying to pay attention to this, which is super exciting. All of you are my overachievers that are going to be rock stars, I'm sure, at the end of this presentation. And then we're going to talk about the most recent updates to the code sets for the US version and the global set, and what that means for Treasury, how that can actually share the trends and what's going on in bank billing and how banks are charging you and how the codes themselves can tell you that. And then we'll talk a little bit about like what that means for you and things to consider. So that's our agenda for today. I'm gonna dive in a little bit here into what are AFP codes, right? So the AFP codes are the industry standard. They've been around since the 80s for helping corporate treasurers. It's not really a bank benefit at all. And sometimes people even wonder, like, why do the banks even want to provide these codes to you? Because it allows the banks, then in your billing, to speak the same language. So you can see, regardless of what one bank might call a service from one thing or the other, The codes are they give you the ability to perform spend analytics, right? Cross-bank comparisons, build models for your RFP to be able to, evaluate proposals in an agnostic way. And you really just can't do anything fun with a bunch of textual descriptions that are cryptic and hard to understand, right? So the first set was really created back when the EDI 822, which was the US standard, was created in the 80s. And now we have a new global set that was created in 2012 that is for the ISO standard files, ISO 20022, which you'll know as either a BSB file, a twist file, or a CAMPT 086. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into that, but also I like to tell people when they say, what is an AFP code? Because honestly, when you're at a dinner conversation and people say, what do you do? And I'm like, I map AFP codes. And they're like, what on earth is that? What it is you and I'll go to the doctor, and at the end of the day, the insurance is going to pay that bill based upon the service that that doctor provided for you, right? So an office visit has a specific billing code, an x-ray, and whatever, right? So they're the exact same thing, but for Treasury services, cash management, payments, there's codes for everything. Not all banks use them for everything, but they're there as a dictionary of every service that your banks could or are providing their large corporate customers. And that's what I think is it's an untapped resource of a way to learn Treasury. So if you are new to Treasury, maybe you came from accounting or somewhere else, I learned the School of Hard Knocks of cash management by really learning the AFP code set. The definitions are in there. A lot of those code definitions that the AFP provides define what a positive pay is, or exceptions, or what is an integrated payable or receivable. So if you're looking for something that is kind of that resource and you're new to Treasury, or you have new analysts that come in straight from college and have no clue, I was handed the old TMA book because that dates me, but today it's really handing them a giant Excel spreadsheet of every billing code and AFP service code. So the fun thing about updating and forming these task forces, which I've had the pleasure of doing since 2008, when I got into this because I volunteered on one when I was a Treasury analyst because I was eager to learn. But we look at these code sets every 4 to 7 years, vendors, banks, corporates, and we talk about where there's gaps. How has the industry changed? Do we need new codes for something because there's not an existing code in the code set that could be used? And so those conversations are super cool. So if you ever get a chance to join the next AFP code update, also connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know, because we're trying to do this on a more regular basis because the industry has definitely changed. So if you're interested in downloading this, you can go to the AFP website. It's like afp.org/service codes. You can pay a very nominal fee for your organization to have access to the latest code versions, and then that really keep that as a resource for your company to use and to leverage. There are 2 different code sets. As I mentioned, we have the US version and the global set. And there's some key differences I want to make sure you are aware of. So because I had this question just at a conference last week where a corporate treasurer was very confused, yelling at the bank, like, you're sending me codes that are different than everybody else. Well, because one bank was giving global codes and other banks were using US codes. You're going to start to see this trend more and more from the big global banks who don't want to have to maintain a US specific file format, and they're going to want to go ISO and only give you a CAMPT 86 file for the whole world and not just a special file for the US. And that's interesting because, we have special things like ECR and, balances being reported on our 822 files that today the Europeans, we don't get balance information because it's not needed. So the reason why there's also different codes and files is because that international file format allows for multiple currencies and also taxes. So the one thing in the US we don't pay taxes on is Treasury services. So that's interesting because outside of the world, they do. So there's a lot that they have to report on VAT and other things. So you're going to see tax information coming through on those international files. But the US codes are 6 digits, right? All numeric for the most part. 010000 is the code for account maintenance. And then on the global side, when we created that code set, we wanted to use alpha 3 digits to be a little bit more user friendly so that when you see ACT, you can tell, okay, that's an account service versus EFT as your first 3 digits would tell you, well, this is an electronic funds transfer versus a 35. Most people aren't going to know that unless you're me. So when you have this is just a picture because it's worth 1,000 words of what the AFP codes look like on a US sample statement on a PDF. Many of the large banks will provide AFP codes on your statements. They've probably been there and you've never paid attention to them, right? So, and because you didn't know what they were. And we're going to solve that today. Outside the US, you're probably not receiving a PDF, and if you are receiving a PDF statement, you don't have codes on them. You're most likely only going to find them within the electronic format, the ISO format. And this is just a sample of what that looks like. It's XML. This is an incoming European SEPA transfer. You have AFP Global. It's telling you what code set that the bank is using, and EFT 23001. So that would be read by a software, right? And then aggregated. So then all of your charges that are related to incoming European SEPA transfers across your banks, it's going to read that AFP code and be able to report that to you. So you can know what you're spending on SEPA transfers as you're calculating that. There are 4 main questions that the codes seek to answer. What is the product? In the US, it's like you're going to have the first few digits of whatever code set is going to tell you the general product area. These are the large buckets of how you're sorting your fees. Is it related to a checks paid or a deposited? Is it an ACH or a wire or a lockbox? Is it has to do with cash, right? They're also going to answer the question many times of unit of measure. Not every little type of unit of measure like per record, per this or that, but the codes will tell you if it's a maintenance charge versus a transaction-based charge. Maybe even in some cases, this is often a per file charge. So file, item, exception, and then monthly maintenance. Also will tell you if it's a processing charge or an exception or reporting. The subheaders of the codes kind of break that down for you so that you can actually try to allocate, what am I really spending on the different types of things? What is this for? And then the delivery method. What we really tried to do, and we're going to get into this a little bit more later, is we noticed that banks are trending where they're not charging you anymore about the information on a report, whether this is a previous day, current day, I mean, that's a little different, but an ACH report, for example, they're going to charge you based upon the delivery of that report. If it's on the internet, if it's a file, or if it's some sort of manual, right? So we wanted to be consistent in the code set, essentially to just go that way. That is how the industry is moving. So we'll do a little exercise here to give you some real mapping experience. So if I'm a bank, and because they're the ones, the product owners or the account analysis product heads are the ones that typically assign the codes at that bank, they have a service, they're going to start charging you for a return item notification online. Online banking pops up, you have a return item, right? That's the service. AFP will have a definition for that, but let's go through the US code logic of this. So I'm going to choose 10 for depository services because, and again, if you have the full Excel spreadsheet, it makes a lot more sense because you can actually just do keyword searches, Control F and Excel, return item, and it'll probably bring you to the right code or at least close. But the code logic is going to say I'm in product family 10 for depository services. The 04 is where all the return item activity and charges are for. And then we're going to have a 1, which is indicating these are notifications. So not processing, but notification, and it's automated. And then in the US set, we break it down by internet. So it's not a file, it's online. Okay, so the actual AFP code of 100416 is actually telling you that this is a depository service, related to return item notifications on the internet. Now, on the global side, there's only about 1,000 global codes. We tried to be higher level. And so the logic is a little different. than on the US, which has 2,700 codes, okay? And so in this case, we're gonna pick the product family DEP for depository services. We're gonna note that it's a 4, which is everything related to checks. And then we're gonna have a 2 for return items, because all return item is gonna be for the 2s. And then a 00 for the item processing, not maintenance, okay? And then it's a notification, which is a 4. So what you don't see is specifically internet, right? Or file or this or that. So the global code is DEP 42004. So one of the challenges, right, is if you have a bank that is charging you, you see a code of DEP 42004 from like Citibank, for example, in Canada, and then you have, a 100416 from a Bank of America or whatever in the US. Well, there could be many US codes that would also translate to DEP 42004. You could have file, you could have anything, because of the global set doesn't care about the specificity of the automation of the notification. So if you receive and are an international corporate where you are going to be receiving files, electronic files, and information from banks, US and global, or even a global bank that might be just starting to move to the ISO world, you're gonna have to solve for this. Now, there are only a few softwares out there. In fact, I only know of one, and I happen to own it, that can handle this. AFP does have a translation table that they provide to anybody that purchases the global codes to tell you that there's a many-to-one relationship between the codes on the US versus the global, and they'll tell you that these 3 US codes could also feed into the global. But just be aware of this, that it's not wrong, and it is but it is something that you'll have to solve for. Not to discourage you, because it's definitely something you can manage. And then so just a couple of things. It's not always black and white, right? A return item processing is pretty standard. Everybody knows what it is. But sometimes banks have different custom services that may not fit exactly into the code set. You also have the challenge of banks doing mapping in their own silos or vacuums, right? So if I gave every single one of you, 174 attendees, the exact same AFP jigsaw puzzle, right? Like a 100-piece puzzle, and I asked you to sort those pieces so that you can put together the picture at the end, you would guaranteed sort those in a different way. You would all agree on the border pieces and creating a border pile. And you would all agree on the pure sky pieces and the pure house pieces, or whatever the picture might be. But what happens when you have those jigsaw pieces that are part sky, part house? Some of you might put them in the sky pile. Some of you might put them in the house pile. And some of you might create a whole new pile just for part sky, part house pieces. This has been the challenge with AFP code assignment historically since the 80s, and why people will get frustrated and stop. Please don't stop, okay? The other challenge is, that we have the, you look at the sheer numbers. So these are a couple of Redbridge clients. I work for a company, Redbridge, Debt and Treasury Advisory. We do a lot of RFPs. We have a lot of software clients. We do have a bank fee analysis software. And one of the big values that why people hire us is because we manage the mapping, right? Because it is the hard part. Data analytics is that classification is key for really great results. So these are just a couple of, I counted how many distinct services some of our clients have. Well, you guys don't have time to map and double check the mapping and align everything for like 1,500 services. Number one, you aren't the product owners of these guys. You don't know exactly what's behind all of these services. And so you're going to be making assumptions. And that's where I was when I was a treasury analyst, and why I got frustrated. So just, kind of keep that in mind. It's okay. We did a little test pilot with one of my clients, and they had a different software. They had mapped everything, and then we compared it to the mapping that we had, that Redbridge had done, and there was a 57% difference. That is crazy. It's also crazy that if we both issued the exact same RFP with that mapping and our different mappings, guaranteed we would have different results. right? So we don't want there to be unpleasant surprises. And it's not, I'm not blaming anyone. It's the nature of the environment. We haven't had a single, authority like the healthcare industry. Those guys have to have that stuff audited, and they don't get paid unless their mapping is perfect. We don't have that in the banking industry. Maybe we need to figure that out, and I'll get through that in a minute. So my advice in the meantime is you can either work with only AFP accredited banks, and I'll tell you in a second what that is, or you can choose a software or partner that's going to help you manage that, or be prepared to do it yourself, just to align it. So depending on the size and scope of what you have and how many banks you may, you'll want to make a plan for that. But so in 2002, so over 20 years ago, AFP launched an accredited service code provider program to try to solve this problem, right? Leveraging the fact that they're an agnostic third party to that has a unique visibility into all the different banks to make sure that the AFP mapping is consistently done across the industry, right? We have about 15 banks that are part of this program, and we hope to continue to grow it. We're working with another large international global bank right now, going through the process. But if you want to, I put the QR code. You can go to it'll take you to the AFP website, which the list of some of the providers are on there, some for confidentiality purposes. They wouldn't let AFP use their logo. So a lot of the big names, which is public, they have a press release. Citibank is one on there, but they just can't be listed on the website. So, you can look at it, see if your bank is there. If they're not, you should ask your bankers, like, hey, have you guys considered accreditation? It would really help me out. But since the inception of that program, we have mapped over 50,000 services, and, across the globe. There's many, many more to go to actually make that official picture, but it's a start. And garbage in equals garbage out when it comes to your analytics with any kind of data analytics, whether it be bank fee data or anything, right? So you have to solve for that classification problem. So that's an overview of what the codes are, okay? Hopefully you have a good understanding of the difference between global codes and US codes, because now I'm gonna, I might have discouraged you a little bit right now thinking, oh my God, this is gonna be hard, but I want to really encourage you now by showing you all the really cool stuff you can do once you meet that challenge, okay? This is the fun part. So when you look at the left side, those are all services from the same bank in different countries. And at the end of the day, they're all just a simple debit credit posting fee. But these cryptic descriptions is what makes bank fee analysis hard, right? Now, in some countries, like in APAC, especially where it's kind of evolving, this idea of actually bank fee analysis is evolving. The big banks, American banks, are using the AFP names now in their description. So they're actually being more transparent. It's not going to be that way in all the different markets, though. And you're still going to have legacy billing systems that these banks are using under the hood that's causing these differences in the names. So that's a lot of the projects going on with the global banks I'm working with, where they are streamlining their pricing catalog across all markets. So make it easier for you. So that's good, but we're not there yet. And then even on the right-hand side, I put in just the US side. I pulled in our database, what do we have across different banks mapped to debit credit posting fees? So even just in the US, you can see things like accounting entry, manual posting, account transfer, activity. A Treasury analyst who's most likely going to be the person who has to do this job of trying to align things, they may or may not know or realize that all of these are actually the same thing. So if you're trying to benchmark across one bank to the other, it may or may not work, right? So that's the beauty of if everything is mapped to 010102, you know exactly that this is what I'm spending on posting fees, and you could build into your model of cost per item of check, cost per item of whatever. You could factor this one code in there and know that you're getting the full picture. When you go on this discovery and you get and dive into the weeds, right? What I want to tell you is like, this is your ticket to really becoming the person who knows the answers in your organization. Because if you go through every single line item on your billing and you answer the question of what is this service, who is using it, and why, you will have a million questions. You will start to really learn about all of the activities in the larger finance finance team, AP, AR, not just Treasury, right? You pay the bill for everybody. And that's what really becomes interesting when you start asking these questions and you giving them insight, those teams insight. Then wow, you become like, oh, what else could you do with this data? Well, I'll tell you. It really helps with budgeting. It helps with cost allocation, right? Because you can now start to allocate your fees across different payment types, legal entities, whatever you want to do. Benchmarking, of course, across different banks. You also, the cost per item. I can't tell you how many times I have, like, head of AP comes over and it says, hey, I've got this initiative. We want to move away from checks and we want to go to an electronic payment. Can you help me put some numbers together to highlight what is our cost to send a wire? What is our cost to send just from the banking side? Of course, there's internal costs as well, but to add into their project plan to move away from checks, right? And then when you start diving into that, you start to realize huge disparities across your banks on that cost per check, because some might be really charging you heavy per account for fraud services. And maybe you're paying for fraud services on accounts that don't even write checks, right? And maybe there's cheaper alternatives to catch that fraud, like reverse positive pay instead of positive pay or things like that. So, when you're building out models like this, the thing to keep in mind is that not everything is going to be mapped in like the disbursement AFP codes, right? That'll have the bulk of them, but those credit posting fees that we talked about earlier, they're going to be in the general account services. And then maybe the volume count of that is going to be in your reporting as well. So if you turn off checks today and turn on ACH for those payments tomorrow, what would change in your billing holistically? That's the challenge, and that's the fun part when you actually get to see that and then to be able to present that to your organization. The other thing that you can do is bucketing these by reporting. As I mentioned, the codes and those subheaders really can help you identify what is a core processing charge versus what am I paying just for reporting, or just as for exceptions, or maybe some extras or things like that. Like, I could turn this off and still make these, and maybe those extras are nice to haves and you need them, or maybe the bank has just oversold you and you're not really using them. They're the sunroofs in the car that you bought that you never open, right? And so you can start to identify those and turn those off and then save your company some money. I love classifying fees by punitive charges. These are charges that you did something wrong, somebody in the organization did something wrong. You sent an incorrect file, you have a bunch of return wires, you have what happened to the stop payments? Like, something happened where, that we had to issue 500 stop payments this month because we sent something wrong, right? And so this is a great way for senior leadership to receive a punitive charge report on a quarterly basis. Maybe you have shared service centers that are performing different functions for you as well. It's a great way, or field offices and treasury units in different countries or whatever. You might, this gives you a way to give oversight into what they're doing. Or if you have juniors and new employees, for you to be able to track. Manual charges, those are great. Of course, nobody wants to be paying for CD-ROMs where we don't even have computers that read them anymore, right? And so where are there electronic alternatives that you could be leveraging, and you better not be paying for paper statements anymore, right? Like the DDA statement papers here. It may only be $150 a month like it was for this company, but that's $150 a month, right? That's a pretty cool generative AI subscription that you could potentially play with. There's other things that you could be using that money for. So classifying those fees into the different drivers buckets is really what's going to help you identify the who or the what behind those costs. And what it really could be is specific people and users. And so when you start to get visibility into this, you could be exposing or finding that who's making these customer service phone calls that are charging us $100 a pop. Well, maybe they didn't know that they were $100 a pop, right? And then maybe you have that brand new, young, straight out of college go-getter who thinks it's going to save a bunch of time to load all your wire templates into your online banking portal to save people time, not understanding or realizing that those cost $1 or $2 each. And now she inadvertently charged her company $2,000 a month just to have wire templates. So these are stories of things that are real life things that I have seen through our engagements that have now all of a sudden people have a general awareness, and the whole organization can be held more accountable for that. But they can't be held accountable for something they don't know. So if I haven't convinced you enough, you can also use bank fee data to create, those justifications for projects, like I said, to help with prioritization, quantifying that, measuring your success. So maybe you did come up with a cool idea to eliminate checks, and you want to prove the volume is going down, and you want to quantify, because it's performance assessment time, how much money you actually saved through this initiative. The answer is in your bank fee data, right? Building the bridges to your other teams, your AP, your AR, within the Treasury teams, to giving insight gets you noticed within by the treasurer, gets you noticed by the CFO, when you can start producing some really interesting reports for them. Of course, cost reduction, everybody would love to save some money, right? So when you dive into this, it's not just the accountability function of like, did the bank charge me accurately? Notice I have not said anything about that this entire presentation, because there's so much more you can do with bank fee data, which is a complete report card of everything that your company has done, that is just really untapped. And then it just gives you that visibility that into your accounts, your services, your fees, the controls that, I thought I turned off that account. I thought I turned off that lockbox, right? Making sure things are migrating the way that they should be, and you're not just throwing money away.
All right, Bridget, let me hop in here real quick, and before we jump into the recent
Sure.
updates, let me go ahead and get a polling question in here. Just from what I've seen, I know the answers. I'll share with that. Just curious of you, before the webinar, were you aware of the 2020 update for the AFP service codes, or those are domestic service codes? I forgot to remind people I'm on the way in. If you'd like a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, if you didn't check that on the registration form, please send me an email. If you'd like a copy of the presentation slides, please send me an email to ernie@treasurywebinars.com. I'll leave the polling question up for a few minutes. Bridget, we had a few people try to use the QR code. Can you give us the website, or where they can find the accredited banks on the AFP website? Where was that again?
It should be on afponline.org. I believe it's /service codes. And then there is a link to the accreditation. And so they can also ping me. I can send them the link afterward.
Great. I just also wanted to kind of point out, from my perspective, my experience when I tried to do the line by line, this was a long time ago, we had about 6 people from the bank into my corporate office, and we eventually got through that line by line. Sorry, bankers out there, but they should be willing to take you through that exercise line by line, no matter how many project managers that takes. So to me, that's a key step in the relationship. So it's good if the banks take some accountability. Like Bridget said, it's not like it's being done on purpose. We're just trying to make things better and get the transparency up to speed. So real quick, what we found, we had 37% of you that were aware, but we still have 63% of folks that were not aware. So, and I'm sure the 2023 update to the Global Service Codes, that really, myself and the whole Treasury profession, we haven't done a good enough job in letting people know these changes are happening. And then, surprise, look at your analysis statements when you start to see them. Bridget, are you seeing the 2020 codes, almost, what does the adoption look like? I've heard from a few people that the 2023 global updates are just starting to happen. Are we still seeing a lag even to the 2020 codes on analysis statements?
I received a statement yesterday, Ernie, that was still using 2008. And this is from a very large top tier bank.
Wow.
It is, they don't have the budget to update it. They have other
Yeah.
priorities. Now, a lot of
Yeah.
them, I will say, like if they're an accredited bank, I know that they're using the 2020 because,
Right.
I've assigned those for them. But there's also, I know that some of the other larger ones have have been rolling those out, and I have the
Yeah.
deadlines in here. But
Okay.
I'd love to say that everybody is using 2020. And we do get questions in the
Yeah.
RFPs from the teams who are like, from
Right.
bankers who are like, your codes are wrong. And it's like, well, no, the codes you're using, they don't even exist anymore. They've been
Oh,
deprecated. And that's an eye-opening thing for a salesperson on the bank side to know, right? And that's what we want to avoid for sure.
so you have not only translation between what's on the analysis statement, but you have to have translation between the code versions. Is that correct? Like
I mean,
2008. Yeah,
yeah,
in some
so I
areas.
mean, it's one of those things where the banks, it's really there. If they're going to provide the codes, provide them
Yeah.
accurately. And what you'll see and I kind of talk this a little bit later, but those,
Yeah.
it's a mandatory field in an EDI 822 file. So banks will just put a placeholder of 999999, which tells you nothing. Right. So even if there's certain products where they have updated or they're releasing something new and they do use the new codes because again they could be assigned when the product is rolled out. Well, some of these products were rolled out ages ago, and once a code is mapped by a bank, it tends to be frozen unless somebody raises an alarm that there's something wrong with it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll let you get back to dive
Sure.
into the updates.
You can
Thank
still
you.
see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to go through, I think we've already gone through the poll question, but I'm going to give you an update a little bit here on what really did happen in 2020. So the world was shutting down. Funny story, we actually started the kickoff project to update these codes like right when the world was shutting down, which gave us an interesting opportunity actually to spend time uncovering all the rocks, go through all 2,700 codes. It was a massive project, but we felt it was time. The last time it had been updated was 2013, and a lot of the world had changed in Treasury. Good things. We added new product families in trade finance. Again, not all banks report trade codes, LCs, things like that in their billing files, but you can, and some banks are moving that direction. And then you have the integrated funds transfer services. So, those integrated payables and receivables, which has become very common in the US, we had no codes for that in the past. Instant payments, obviously, that's self-explanatory. We needed codes for any kind of instant payment and RTP. Imaging has definitely changed in the industry. Used to be very siloed by product. You'd pay for image to receive images of a lockbox item, and that would be in the lockbox area, and then you'd pay to see an image of something, a transaction of a checks paid, right, or something like that. And those would be billed in separate product areas. Now we're seeing the trend of banks just charging you for access to the image portal where you can see everything. And you can have a flat file of all checks or all activity and not just one product. So we needed to find a way to handle that where we call them like multi-product services. So you see some banks, their pricing strategy is to charge you per file, but they don't care what's on the file. It could be a positive pay file. It could be a previous day reporting file. It could be anything, and it's just a per file fee. Well, how the heck do you map that? So, and then APIs, right? Because as we're moving towards that, it was like, how do we treat that? Where is that going to go? Because it could just be overall charges for API connectivity. And even at the time of this task force, APIs were brand new and banks weren't sure how they were going to charge it per call, per not, flat fees, et cetera. So we needed to make sure that we had codes available to start tracking that because it's been really eye-opening now that those charges have been coming through and comparing that to legacy, SFTP, file transfer, typical transmission files, how they could be quite more expensive depending on the pricing model. So things to be aware of. But we did try to deprecate and clean up the codes as much as we could to eliminate things that just don't make sense. So you can see we literally took a third of the codes out. And then we did add some new ones that were needed. And then we modified those to really clarify the definitions where we needed to. So this is all the US product categories on the left. You can see there's quite a few of them. Depository services is one of the largest because of all of the branch, cash and coin, vault services, things like that. So all of them were really changed. The information services and reporting, we definitely did a haircut on that area and simplified it because banks have simplified the way that they're charging for that. Some banks are even doing it for free. So we really needed to kind of make the codes more reflective to today's environment. So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of what the codes have taught us. So like this task force, the new service codes and reflecting today. And this is what's super fun about being on a task force is you get to really kind of know what's happening in the industry, how banks are evolving in a safe space. So account validation services, right? To help you send a pre-authorization or validate that this is a real account was something new. We talked about multi-product imaging and transmissions and APIs, but also having some codes for mobile authorizations. Artificial intelligence, of course, is a big one today as banks might be rolling out some cool new offerings and they needed to have a place to put them. Even a lockbox, which we would consider pretty old school, not much has changed. They're continuing to digitize lockbox, right? And as volumes start to trend down, the advent of multi-DDA lockboxes can actually is being offered by certain banks, mini boxes, if you will. Ernie, I think I'm getting an echo. I don't know. Could you mute your line? I don't know if it's because of you and I. Thank you. And so and then healthcare receivables, healthcare lockboxes. I mean, they're one of the hospitals, insurance companies. They're one of the biggest users of lockboxes, and there's some really special stuff that banks do for them, which automate a lot of that mapping of the EOBs with everything else. So the AR matching to help out, that was also something that in 2013 really wasn't as evolved as it is today. So sending your accounts receivable file and having that lockbox research that exception item automatically has been super helpful. Within ACH, also a product that you wouldn't think really has changed all that much. We did a more cleanup because banks don't charge for different file formats like PPD or CCD plus and things like that they used to. So we cleaned a lot of that up. The concentration services, it was brought to the table that maybe in the future, we're not going to just use ACH to do concentration services anymore. We might be using instant payments. We might be using something else. So we broadened that definition and the application of those codes. And then, the reporting to the delivery, as we talked about, nobody cares if it's an ACH activity report, premium, this or that. It's really by file. Is it a transmission? Is it online versus the content on it? And then we talked about the definition of automated funding. What does that actually mean? And so if you use any of that, it's good to, versus a standing order, that's something that we tried to clarify in this new code set. So again, it's kind of writing the dictionary of Treasury. On the check side, everybody's doing check print outsourcing. We needed to make sure that the codes were reflective of all of the different services that those companies that offer check print outsourcing had codes for them. And nobody receives physical checks anymore back. You get an image of it, right? So for paid checks. And then the other thing we noticed was that so many banks charge different combinations of payee, positive pay, payee match, positive pay, reconciliation, full recon, partial recon, and there was all these different combinations and bundling. And so we had to build out some flexibility in the code set to help you manage that. On the wires, of course, I mentioned we had a whole new group for instant payments and then making sure we had everything for all forms of electronic payments. EDI services are really a thing of the past, if you will. They're really related to either APIs or multi-product transmission services, which we moved to the general accounts area, or they're related to payment files. So those belong in the funds transfer file transmission area. So most of EDI went away. So if you're a banker and you're charging a lot of EDI services, you might want to have a conversation about that. And then information reporting. You used to pay differently if you were receiving accounts information for international accounts versus domestic. Obviously, we don't do that anymore. And banks have really simplified that. One of the other things that we really tried to clarify with this code set was the difference between an electronic lockbox and EBIP or EBPP or electronic bill pay and presentment or bill collection services. There were so many names related to this, and we needed to clarify for the industry what the heck an electronic lockbox actually is, because we found all the banks defining it differently, which becomes very confusing for a corporate. So if you want to know, an electronic lockbox is now officially defined in the AFP code set, right, as bill pay aggregation. And the way I like to tell people, and what we really try to kind of wrap your head around the differences between this, is where's the customer going to make the payment? Are they going to their own online banking portal, and issuing these payments and scheduling them there? And then all of those payments get funneled through, and maybe it's with aggregation, maybe it's not, or presentment and maybe not. Or are they going to their provider? Are they going to the electricity company to make their payment, either in person at a grocery store, over the phone, or on the website where there's options to pay by card or check or whatever that the supplier provides. So that's the main difference, but it is something that took us weeks and us bringing in lots of industry experts from product owners from the different banks to make sure we got that right. And so if you see any of these weird EBIPs, EBPPs, cryptic names, I do encourage you to try to think through that, and also and if you're a banker, look into that. So Arnie, did you want to do this poll or should I keep going?
Yeah. Let me just jump in here. Just real quick, just also wanted to see the awareness of the 2023 Global Service Codes. When I was still back at AFP, we were just starting the initial project way back when, and I can tell you, Bridget is a saint of patience, because having banks from all over the world on the phone that have a different definition of everything from what color the sky is, it could be challenging at best. So let me go ahead and, all right, so give you guys a few more seconds. People don't want to get a certificate of attendance, but what we're seeing, which is what I've seen on my online polls, right now we're at 6% of people that were actually aware of the change, and 30% didn't even know the code set existed. So just food for thought for us who educate Treasury professionals on what we can do to help better educate the Treasury profession. One of the top things we can do is educate them on bank service codes, and that's why we're thrilled to have Bridget here with us today. So Bridget, I'll hand the floor back over to you.
Sure thing. And I'm not surprised, because literally the announcement just was like in the AFP newsletter that said, hey, we published a new code set. So it wasn't widely, I think, distributed, on that, but it is really important, as I said, for us to get the words out. Obviously, the large banks that were all involved in the task forces with me were, which were all the large, big international banks, were kind of a part of this project. They're aware, but it's good for the corporates to be aware, to be able to continue to ask their international banks. So as I said, and just a reminder, right, these codes are designed for the ISO file, and as the world moves to ISO, both for your reporting, instead of BAI, most likely you're going to start receiving some sort of ISO CAMP 053 in the future. This is the international bank fee format. So they're probably going to give you global codes. So these are kind of the codes of the future. So I also think they're really, really important. So obviously a lot of the changes that we made to the global set was for consistency to the changes we had made in the 2020 set. So you can see we didn't change everything. There 55% of them were not changed. We did modify a lot of them, again, for better clarity. and we added 16%. But as you can see, we didn't deprecate very many because there are fewer codes to begin with, and they haven't been around as long. So made the same changes on instant payments, imaging, and APIs, but also some other things. So I just wanted so these are the product groups for the global code set. As you can see, it's cleaner. We learn from our mistakes sometimes, but the electronic funds transfer is by far the biggest service code set because everything kind of got bucketed under that. Outside of the US and Canada, most of the world does not use checks. So we didn't really have to, do a deeper dive of those, but rather those are more for consistency purposes. But EFT is where we spent a lot of our time on this. And then account services. So you'll see the same trends: account validation, artificial intelligence, API, and imaging. Fraud services is really becoming a hot ticket outside of the US because they've seen how much money they can make off of their US corporates charging for fraud services. So now that's becoming very, very popular with your international banks to institute fraud monitoring. So be on the lookout for that. Cash may not be king anymore, but it's definitely there. The difference is in the US, we have more of a history of having those armored carrier fees and cash vault fees being charged by the bank, kind of, even though under the hood, it might be Dunbar, Loomis, Brinks, somebody like that they have a relationship with. As they get less and less into this market and kind of outsource that to third parties, it's more transparent outside of the US, but we still needed to have codes for armored carrier services, ATM deposits, and more deposit imaging because they didn't really have that in the past. And again, for consistency, but you can buy postage stamps and make a deposit in France in the same machine. I know because I accidentally got stamps instead of doing my deposit because I didn't speak French. I didn't know how to read the screen. So another side note. But the electronic payments, again, EFT, we did a little study and I had my data team here at Redbridge do, we have a lot of international corporates and we wanted to see what do they spend their money on? And outside of, just looking holistically, where's the revenue to the bank primarily outside of the US market? And 47% of that revenue is from electronic funds transfers. So you're paying, if you look at what are my fees that I pay outside of the US, chances are it's for electronic payments of some sort, any fee related to processing those payments. And where we didn't do the exercise just for the US, we probably should, but I would really see more for like paper, lockbox, depository services, disbursements, things like that, versus the EFT, because ACH, wires, those are generally much cheaper as the banks try to get you to go electronic. So just something to keep in mind of if you're looking, really dive into your electronic funds transfers and your general account services outside, because those are going to be the bulk of your fees. One of the other big confusions is that you've had urgent payments, now instant payments, instant SEPA, et cetera, real-time payments like wires, telegraphic transfers, et cetera, right? Cross-border payments, intercompany payments, and book payments, right? So what we tried to do was really make sure we had codes for all of those types of services very clear. So domestic, is it a domestic? So when you think of in the US, that's ACH. This is some sort of local clearinghouse that is processing this payment. You have your SEPA transactions in Europe. You have cross-border transactions, which are different because they're not real time. They're cross-border, not real-time payments. Then you have your instant payments, your RTGSs, which is your real-time gross settlements or wires, and your book companies, and then intercompany. Sometimes banks will give you a break if it's a cross-border, but it's intercompany. So in the US, we think ACH, wire, instant payments. Outside the US, you have a whole different bucket system of payments. So when you're calculating your cost per payments, just keep that in mind. We also needed to separate because the word payment in and of itself is really confusing. Most Treasury people would consider that as an accounts payable. It's a disbursement, but a lot of people view a payment as an incoming receipt. So when you start translating the word payment to non-English native speakers, it gets even worse. So we had to make sure we were very clear that we're talking about payments that are initiated by a customer or outgoing versus those that are received by a customer and incoming. The other area that was a lost in translation kind of a moment was related to exceptions, because you have cancels, reverses, returns, reclaims, and recalls. And we were like, what is the difference? Do we need to have separate codes for every single one of these, as we would see all of the exception items that the different banks were charging for? So we created this chart to really help people understand what is the difference. Again, defining this for the industry. Of really the differences are, has the money left the account yet or not? Has it settled to an account yet or not? So there are definitely differences in that. The treatment of those non-black and white services are very different between the US and the global set. So I just want to go this. I know we're kind of getting closer to the end of time. But codes in the US use 9s and Zs to indicate if something is undefined, or I'm bundling everything after this code and the code set could be true. So when we say bundled, we're basically saying we're combining any code after this set that could, maybe there's multiple that are true. So versus in the global set, there's no restriction on code length. You don't have to have 6 digits. So rather than introducing another character that people don't understand what a Z means, we decided to just shorten the code. So in the chart and table, ACT 631 is a valid code. It is a shorter code, but it's indicating to you that there multiple options after that code could be true. And then if you see an ACT 639, that means nothing is true after the ACT 63 digits in the code set. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear. We have a dream, and like MLK, you start somewhere. We started with the CAMPTO 86 in this ISO formatted file, and it's just cash management services. Already some banks are bringing in credit card charges, especially in Europe, into this file format. We have a dream that maybe someday we'll have the entire bank wallet visible in an international file format. Maybe in my lifetime. I certainly hope so, as we start to connect more and more back office systems and banks start to upgrade those, that we'll get there. But even if your bank is not doing this today, those codes do exist. So if you are going to do an RFP in a different area and you want to use industry standard codes, they exist in the book. And I want to make sure you know that they are there for you. So I'm going to kind of breeze through this because it's really just rehashing it. The main issue is that we need to make sure that the banks are upgrading and all using the same code set, and ideally becoming accredited. So please have a conversation with your banks, find out what they're using, and then that will make your life a lot easier. And then you can really work on that together, or make a plan. Like I said, Redbridge, we're here to help. It's why we took the extra step to make sure we manage that for our clients, because it is hard. And I hope I didn't discourage you, even though it is hard. It can be hard sometimes. It's certainly worth it. And if you don't start somewhere, you're going to go nowhere, right? So the Bob Marley movie's coming out. Thought I would give him a little shout out. So your to-do list is, number one, if you're not receiving them, ask for electronic billing files. If you don't have one, choose the right software provider to help you do this job easier, right? To really help you dive into this and aggregate the data. And then use those codes to help you analyze your spend. If you don't take my word for it, I was able to present with some of these lovely treasurers at the recent AFP conference, who all have different fabulous stories to tell about how they were able to it really helps empower them in their roles to give them all access to that data. And I did put my QR code here too. I'm hoping this will work for you. If not, connect with me on LinkedIn, Bridget Meyer, one of the only few. But happy to continue the conversation, answer your questions, as I know we are at time. Your analysis, at the end of the day, your success is only going to be as good as your data and your knowledge of it. So become that person who knows the answers. And thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Bridget, for that amazing information and insights. A couple of things, just again, just get started, get the codes, just make it a process, and you'll be amazed how much information you get. Like one of the things that Bridget really said that stuck out to me was how much you learn by understanding the codes. It's a great tool to teach your Treasury team. So I think that's something that is really incredible. So thank you, Bridget, for not only joining us today, but all that you have done over a large part of your career in helping us deliver transparency into banking services. And I have no doubt that you and your team will branch it and get us visibility into that wallet. So again, here's the QR code. Bridget Meyer, again, if you look on LinkedIn, she's pretty easy to find. And if you're going out to the AFP regional conferences, you may have the opportunity to see her or her teammates at the conference. So please go up and have a conversation with them. I know they'll be happy to speak with you. So everyone, thank you very much, as always, for your valuable time. Make the rest of your day great, everyone.